Hello everyone, Alec Alger the SideQuest Gamer here, and welcome to part 2 of my Mega Man retrospective. For part 2, I'll be looking at Mega Man 2. Of course. And how does it hold up in 2017? It was the game that set the standard for all future Mega Man titles. The first Mega Man introduced its non-linear rock, paper, scissors formula that only gets expanded upon in sequels to come. Once again developed and published by Capcom, the higher-ups allowed the original team to work on a sequel despite the original bombing in sales. The condition was that they work on other projects first and develop Mega Man 2 on their spare time. According to Inafune, they would spend nearly 20-hour workdays just working on Mega Man 2. That must be stressful, yet he cites it as the best time working at Capcom. I don't know, losing half a night's sleep just to get a game out is something I wouldn't agree to, but kudos to the team for putting all their passion into this project. They even finished development in around 4 months, which is very impressive, and was released to the public in December of 1988, 1 year after the original. Unlike Mega Man 1, Mega Man 2 was a commercial success, selling roughly 1.5 million copies worldwide. Perhaps it's a better box art where Mega Man is now holding a ray gun, shooting at a menacing costume character with boomerangs. Sure, it's kind of dumb looking today, but definitely appealing if you're looking for an action-packed NES game. Heck, I dare say that the fact that there's a number 2 on the cover is itself a selling point because it gives the illusion that the first was so good it warranted a sequel. Even though that's not the case, it does raise some consumer interest. And this time the American box art looks better than the PAL version. I mean, sure, some may prefer the Tin Man in the desolate future setting, but I honestly like the cheesy looking American box art because it's more consistent with the lighthearted tone Mega Man is known for. Despite Mega Man 2 having universal critical acclaim, Mega Man fans are a bit divided when it comes to the praise of the game that it got initially. Yes, years ago, NES buffs called it the best Mega Man game to date, but I noticed recently that like Zelda Ocarina of Time, there's a good portion of people now saying that Mega Man 2 is overrated, and 3 seems to be the new fan favorite. It has been nearly 28 years since this game was originally released, and it doesn't surprise me that, like time, the gaming culture norm has changed significantly to account for people playing this game for the first time many years later. But rather than go into needless diatribes about whether this game deserves the praise from the evil straw man that is the Mega Man fan base, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to look at Mega Man 2 for what it did right and what could be improved upon. That's all. The game begins with text underneath a city background with the closest futuristic building covering half the screen. This recaps the story of Mega Man 1, but is rather inconsistent with Mega Man 1's manual storyline. In the first game's manual, Mega Man was created by Dr. Light and assisted by Dr. Wily, with both doctors proceeding to build 6 more robots, before Dr. Wily of course reprogrammed the 6 newly constructed robots to do his evil bidding. But now in 2000X, this intro is telling me Dr. Wily already turned evil before Mega Man was built, and that Dr. Light built Mega Man specifically to stop Wily's evil schemes, and probably the 6 robot masters that allowed for Wily to carry out his evil desires. And the loose continuity that is the Mega Man timeline would get even more confusing with Mega Man 3, just you wait. So after Wily was defeated in the first game, he built 8 new robot masters to counter Mega Man. After that story bit, the camera continues to pan up the towers, revealing our triumphant hero Mega Man without his helmet, looking over the city as its guardian. I guess he ditched the hair gel. And then the title screen shows with 2 difficulty options being normal and difficult. The normal mode in this version is just like the difficult mode, except Mega Man deals twice the damage, which in my opinion makes it a little too easy for my liking. The difficult mode, however, is actually the original Japanese difficulty because this is one of the few instances where the developers in Japan didn't feel the need to make it arbitrarily harder to combat the rental market over in the United States. I do recommend playing normal mode if this is your first Mega Man game, but if you played any of the others, you might as well play the difficult mode. It's really not that difficult. Regardless of the difficulty option you choose, you're taken to a menu where instead of 6 panels with each robot master sprite in it like the last game, Now you can choose from 8 robot masters to start off in, with the background having more detail to it, in addition to each panel having a close-up of the robot master's face. This becomes the standard of level selects for the rest of the series, and I like it better this way because it gives the menu more life to it. No offense to the original menu, but that one is just barren and empty. Now, if you've seen my previous review, Mega Man's boss order is based off a rock, paper, scissors design philosophy where you defeat the weakest robot master with your default buster weapon, and then proceed to find and defeat the next one with the enemy's power you acquired, and so on and so forth. But it's actually quite different this time. While each boss is weak to a certain acquired weapon, there are actually 4 robot masters weak to one weapon, the Metal Blade. This weapon is so overpowered that it can take down 4 robot masters within seconds, making non-linearity less punishing on the player, but also resulting in the player having an easier time than they would any other entry in the series. It's pretty fun, don't get me wrong, and I'm not one to feel guilty over effortlessly ripping my enemy to shreds with a power-up that the game told me I earned, but this is also somewhat flawed in a sense. I wouldn't say it's good or bad, but more along the lines of gray game design, because there is a harder difficulty option that makes the robot masters more of a challenge, and the Metal Blade's power does allow for you to go through 4 levels without the trial and error of discovery punishing you severely if you go the wrong level with just a buster and Metal Blade. I mean, it's like the perfect doomsday weapon, and with Metal Man being one of Dr. Wily's creations, we're lucky we took him out before he could be used to destroy the world of robots as we know it. Unlike Mega Man 1, where I only found 4 of the levels to be fun due to the slippery controls and awkward platforming sections, there's very little I have to complain about with Mega Man 2's Robot Master levels, save for one which I'll get to in a bit. Airman and Bubble Man stages are the iconic Mega Man 2 stages everyone praises, and I really like what they did with them. In Airman's stage, there are these platforms with enemies spawning from the sides in addition to damaging drills coming up from the top you best not hit, so you have to time these obstacles correctly in hopes of hopping at the center of each one without taking damage. I really like this idea because I've not seen this in a platformer game before nor after. Bubble Man's stage has unique zero gravity-esque jump controls where because it's underwater, Mega Man can jump as high as he wants, but jumping too high will result in an instant kill from the ceiling spikes. This level wants you to master its control scheme, and I have to admit, it's very clever how it not only makes it stand out from the rest, but also break up the monotony a little bit with gameplay variety. And then there's Metal Man's stage, which introduces conveyor belt platforming, making you think about your movement in relation to the platform's movement. Some of these conveyor belts are moving backwards while others are moving forwards, and they're right next to these spike traps. You have to be careful with how you time these obstacles, or if say you move forward on a forward moving belt right next to a spike trap, you'll be thrown right into the trap and lose some health. This is a new and fresh challenge that I haven't seen before. If this game's level design succeeds in anything, it's most definitely how a few levels have their own gimmicks to make them stand out from the rest. But the one time I don't feel the gimmick was best executed would be Quickman's infamous laser beam section. Oh boy, this section I can breeze through alright, but I'm speaking as someone who'd memorized the layout, but a first time player could just fall there with a placement of platforms and then surprise mother you're dead. The first time that happened to me, I was like, how was that fair? I wasn't given enough time to react. This section I feel is poorly designed because A, the new player is hardly given enough time to react to these beams when they're trying to see what's ahead. B, the Flashman's time stopper weapon stops the beams in place, making it easier to get by. But C, the new player might have not acquired the time stopper, and D, even if they did, they could stop the beams but die on the last set, restart, but because they collect the weapon refills, they can't use it anymore. This section can make someone burst a temple artery. What the heck happened here in the design phases of this game? Were the developers so sleep deprived when designing this level? Oh yeah, just the player will have enough time to examine the environment in addition to dodging these lasers that just came out of nowhere.
Eller, get good. My 4-year-old brother beat it with no problem, so therefore it's a 10 out of 10 game design.
Jay, you never had a brother, and didn't you complain about a similar laser section in your Mega Man X5 review?
Sure did. I just needed an excuse to troll you.
Well, in that case, mission accomplished. Again, it's not a problem with repeat playthroughs, but I feel this game failed to give context of these laser beams up ahead, and how it's difficult for the player to analyze the obstacles before dying to these instant kill laser beams. And it can get a little worse, say if you do get past that section but use the time stopper. Now you can't use Quickman's weakness against him, because if you're a new player you likely use that to get past the last parts of the laser beam sections. Luckily Quickman is a somewhat easy boss with your default buster weapon and air shooter, but still. And as for the rest of the stages, Crashman stage is my second least favorite because of how it's just climbing ladders and shooting airborne enemies that infinitely spawn. It's all fine and good, but it doesn't really do anything new and exciting. One Man stage is more combat oriented, but it has a nice aesthetic as well as unique obstacles being the gorillas, the bats, and the mini-boss panthers that get progressively trickier with new environmental layouts. And both Flashman and Heatman stages present some options with how you go about the levels depending if you have the right tools, being these destructible walls you can open up if you have the crash bombs, therefore being able to avoid any platforming you don't want to do. Heatman stage, speaking of which, reintroduces the disappearing block platforming, except now on steroids since there's a section of fast disappearing blocks you have to memorize quickly and platform on the right one or risk dying in the instant kill lava. Although you can cheese your way out of that section thanks to item 2 being this jet platform. This is a positive for player options, but it can also be seen as a negative since it does break a portion of the level. But despite most of these stages being alright to even great, the boss battles are way too easy. Even on difficult, they're pretty easy. I will give Capcom credit for improving them from the first game, since a lot of these enemies can be taken out with a default buster weapon, but the weaknesses really make these boss battles a total pushover. Take Airman for example, really fun boss battle when you have to jump over his whirlwind projectiles while resisting the wind physics, but it disappoints me that he can be easily taken out with 2 leaf shields and that's it, for normal difficulty at least. The solution would be to make him die in 4 or 5 leaf shields, but it just goes to show that while Capcom has a better idea of how they want to design these robot master boss battles, the execution leaves a lot to be desired. Same can be said for the balance of the acquired weapons. Of the 8 acquired weapons, Metal Blade, as I said before, is overpowered to the point where you can get by with just the Metal Blade. It hardly drains any energy and can be fired in 8 directions. Capcom could have nerfed it where it uses 2 or 3 times as much energy as it does now, so there'd be more use for the other weapons. The air shooter is useful for airborne enemies since it moves in an upward arc, and I'm not going to lie when I say that it really came in handy against bosses like Quickman after depleting his primary weakness. Atomic Fire is an alright offensive weapon, and I just found out recently you can charge it, but I didn't find myself using it except for a few bosses. Same goes for Bubblehead, except at least I used that to find invisible pits disguised as floors. And my least favorite weapon is by far the Time Stopper because of how situational it is for Quickman's stage laser, but anything else it's not much help. Heck, it's hardly any help against Quickman himself, and that's his primary weakness. I think my biggest gripe with the weapon is just how I hate how you can't stop it until it runs out completely. You can't even fire your default weapon when time stops, making it useless against regular combat scenarios. But at least the Leaf Shield is great against weak enemies like the birds that drop the enemy-filled eggs. It can serve both as a projectile against enemies or as a defense item. That is clever. The Crash Bomber can serve as a tool to destroy these walls, unlocking shortcuts as a result, and as an offensive tool against enemies. Sure, it's not the most powerful offensive weapon, but it can be very helpful, especially against boss battles. And the quick boomerangs are great against weak enemies and are very energy efficient. Definitely not as powerful as the Metal Blade, but it didn't need to be. This would be the ideal weapon of choice for combat oriented stages, since some enemies are outright immune to its effects. As you can see, some of these weapons are quite good, but the Metal Blade is just so overpowered it overshadows the other weapons. Thankfully the weapons in the sequels are more balanced. And once you do beat all 8 stages with items 1 through 3 unlocked, you move on to the Wily Castle stages. Let's see how they fare this time. Before entering each stage, you're now shown a map of the Skull Fortress Wily resides in, which becomes a staple for all future installments afterwards. I like this because it gives you a sense of progression as to where you are and when the journey might end. Regardless, these stages spike in difficulty expecting you to make the best of not just your 8 abilities but also the deployable platforms like the jet and ascending platform items. Wily Stage 1 is simple. You're forced to either use Item 1 or Item 3 to climb up this building, and at the end, there's a pathetic boss battle against a robot dragon that pursues you until you spam quick boomerangs, resulting in its death seconds later. Even though it's one of the most iconic bosses in Mega Man, it's kind of an underwhelming way to end off a decent stage. I like the spectacle, but that's about it. Wily Stage 2 forces you to use Item 2 to cross a giant pit of instant kill spikes with the returning obstacles such as the spike traps and drill enemies you saw in Metal Man stage. It's nothing we haven't seen before. I somewhat enjoyed the boss battle against Pico Con, because the boss battle against a series of blocks that form from the walls presents frequent touch damage hazards. You have to be careful not to let completed blocks touch you, as well as converging blocks. Easier said than done, since sometimes you could be standing on top of one of its parts without knowing it until it's too late. It's kind of flawed in a sense, but I do like the idea it's going for. Wily Stage 3 reintroduces the underwater platforming in this murky water that I don't know what's in it. There's the usual underwater hazards, mainly with the one where you free fall and avoid instant kill side spikes. I do believe you're given enough time to dodge, because when you go down a screen, you can see the next one form, giving you a sufficient time to know what direction to lightly tap before Mega Man resumes motion. And the boss battle against Guts Tank was alright. All he did was deploy Met-Tool enemies while he just stand there on his base and spam quick boomerangs. There's really nothing to it. If those stages were easy so far, well, Stage 4 starts challenging the player's expectations thanks to these invisible pits. The first one teaches you of its existence, and you don't mind it until you see a platform above visible spikes. With this stage's logic, you anticipate an invisible pit sending you into those instant kill spikes, but rather than wasting a life finding out the pit's location, you could just use the bubble lead to travel along the floor, and the section where it falls into the spikes is where the pit is. Simple as that. This is game design I like because it teaches the player to be clever and that nothing in Mega Man is impossible if you use the right tool. And up ahead is probably the hardest platforming challenges in the game, being that moving platform and the infinitely spawning enemies. I'm not gonna lie when I say I died so many times in this section when I first played it because of its complexity, but I don't think it's too difficult nowadays. In fact, I welcome it since this is the last major platforming challenge in the game and there's enough context on screen to get you by. But this boss battle, however, being the boom beam traps, is what the Mega Man 2's overrated crowd cites as the cheap boss battle of the game for one reason. You only have a certain amount of crash bombs you can use before running out, and with that being their only weakness, the stakes are high. They're always shooting at you with precision, and there are a ton of blockades protecting these turrets. They can be exploited and easily taken out by using all your crash bombs carelessly on the blockades, dying, replenishing that weapon's energy by farming, re-entering the fight, and taking out the last few since the ones you destroyed before oddly don't respawn. But from my recent playthroughs, I found out you don't have to do that to kill the wall turrets, but usually I die before taking the turrets out while only destroying the 2 blockades. Now don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean this boss battle is great. Believe me, I find it tedious regardless of whether I go the careful route or the reckless route with my crash bombs, but I don't really think this is irritating enough to detract from the experience. I'd honestly say Quick Man stage and the overpowered nature of the Metal Blade are better arguments for the Mega Man 2 naysayers. And then the moment has finally come where we take on Dr. Wily. In the second to the last stage, this introduces the boss rush that will be used for all the sequels to come. In this room are 8 capsules to choose from, where you have to fight the 8 robot masters again, as opposed to spreading them throughout the castle stages like in Mega Man 1. I kind of like this idea because it shows how powerful you've become with your acquired abilities, and unlike Mega Man 1, a defeated robot master would actually give you a little bit of health, so you're not losing your lives before the stage's boss battle, being Dr. Wily in his spacecraft. However, I do understand the disdain and annoyance from some Mega Man fans who just see this as nothing more than padding out the game. After all, you are fighting 8 robot masters you've fought before with little to no changes in the environment. And the two-faced Dr. Wily boss battle isn't too shabby either, since you have enough health to get by, and you can experiment with all your weapons until you find the best one that works on him. I do find it a little tricky to dodge his projectiles, especially since there's not a lot of space in between them. But I didn't have too much trouble destroying his vehicle. After that boss battle, the floor explodes underneath you and you travel through a silent acidic cave. This section is actually quite atmospheric for an otherwise action-packed Mega Man game thanks to the dripping sound effects of the acid serving as the calm before the storm. You see the doors and enter into a black room where Dr. Wily's UFO zooms by with Wily floating out of it. Dr. Wily is bulging, and wait, Dr. Wily was an alien the whole time? I did not see that coming on my first playthrough years ago. This visual plot twist took me by surprise on my first playthrough. I mean, it's a game with a simple story and cute manga-esque characters. To have the stage before unsettle you for this very fight and then have a plot twist like this come out of nowhere, that is clever. And let me tell you, this fight is intense because Alien Wily floats around shooting pellets at you, moving in a figure-8 motion. His only weakness is not the metal blade, but rather the bubble lead. This is probably my favorite boss in the game because of how reasonably challenging it is. It's a kind of intense final boss that would have your hands sweat and force yourself to think about every move carefully, but when you're done, you feel a sense of satisfaction, not frustration, unlike the final boss in the first game. With Alien Wily destroyed, the dark room flashes and the game kind of cops out of the twist it presented, where the room is now lit and there's a machine moving in a figure-8 motion. The real Dr. Wily was controlling it from the cliché sci-fi console. Yeah, that Dr. Wily alien was just a machine, of course. So, Wily begs for mercy, again, and Mega Man, of course, just leaves Dr. Wily in his fortress, tells him not to do it again, and from what I'm gathering from the ending, Mega Man takes a year-long walk home since the seasons are passing in the same valley, and just leaves his helmet on a flowery hill overlooking that same valley. So how does Mega Man 2 hold up compared to the first one? Well, let me tell you, a heck of a lot better. Jeez, this game introduced so many improvements to Mega Man 1, I can't even go back to the first game. In addition to better level design, the graphics are really good for 1988. Mega Man and the Robot Master sprites seem more colorful and vibrant. It also helps that some of the level backgrounds have something going on for it, like Metal Man's stage having the gears turning in the background. And while Mega Man 1 had some really good chiptunes, Mega Man 2 just ups the ante. It's definitely not the best soundtrack in the series I've heard, but it's up there with some of the X games, I'd say. The opening theme will forever be stuck in your head because of you being astonished by the panning up of the tower, and then it finally reaches Mega Man. The track starts off with a slow pace, but then builds up to this epic theme that will forever be stuck in your head when thinking about Mega Man. Either that or the iconic Wily Stage 1 theme. I think everyone's heard this, and to be honest, it's a little overplayed, but I understand why it's fondly remembered. And the Robot Master stages like Airman, Bubbleman, and Metal Man have some iconic themes that goes with their level motifs, especially for Bubbleman since some of the percussion has changed to add a sense of atmosphere, but still maintaining that sense of fast-paced action that is appropriate with all Mega Man games. And some of the slower-paced themes like the ending theme for example are quite good as well, because after an epic action game like Mega Man 2, it's alright to end it with a melancholy melody like this. It's an appropriate way to give a game a sense of finality. With that being said, Mega Man 2 is a vast improvement over Mega Man 1. It actually did all the things that Mega Man 1 only tried to do. And while Mega Man 1 it was an alright experience, Mega Man 2 I actually had some fun with. But Mega Man 2 isn't perfect in nearly all aspects, and it'll only get better from here. So with that being said, Mega Man 2 is decent. I won't say it's perfect because some introductions and improvements do have some things that could have been done better and will be done better. Is Mega Man 2 overrated like a good portion of the people say nowadays? I don't know, maybe? It's up to you. I've said my piece about the overpowered Metal Blade, and thanks to it, there's definitely a lack of balance that I kind of see past to have a good time, but I am aware of its existence, and I am more appreciative of the sequels for nerfing the weapons to a reasonable degree. If you're going to have really powerful weapons, then you should give them an appropriate consequence like using up more energy than others. And despite the game introducing E-tanks allowing you to refill health anywhere, I do hate that you can lose them during a game over, even if you decide to select continue. This game definitely has some flaws, but I think everything else is done pretty well, so much so that I can recommend it to anyone who has never played a Mega Man game before. Heck, it even introduced a password system allowing you to pick up where you left off, which restore points on re-releases defeat the purpose of, but hey, improvements. Especially since if you played it on original hardware, the first game forced you to beat it in one sitting, so that password system is a very welcome addition if you're playing Mega Man 2 on original hardware. Mega Man 2 is simply what the first game should have been, and it has set the standard of all future entries in the series, While Mega Man 1 was a rocky start, Mega Man 2 was a redemptive sequel that turned Mega Man into a series. Anyways, be sure to tune into part 3 where I'll be looking at... what was the name of the game again? Oh right, Mega Man 3. Coming soon to a theater near you. Okay, not really. And Mega Man 3 was released 2 years after Mega Man 2, so let's see if the extra development time paid off. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember to stay awesome.